My seat was not a chair at the table. It was a card, a small rectangle of ivory stock, printed in elegant type, placed on a narrow console near the ballroom entrance. The kind of seating card that looks harmless until it becomes a verdict. That night, the verdict had my name on it. I noticed it because I still live the way overlooked people live. I scan, I map, I count, I memorize exits. I build little systems to keep myself steady inside other people's rooms. The habit started when I was a kid, and my eyes would lose their place on the page. Words would slip, lines would blur, letters would swap places like they were laughing at me. Dyslexia made school feel like a house where the hallways kept moving. My family turned that into a personality trait. Slow, soft, not built for serious things. My older sister Serena collected credentials the way our mother collected pearls. Ivy League degrees, internships with names that sounded like gates in marble. She learned to speak in boardroom rhythms before she learned to speak like a sister. My parents learned to praise her publicly and tolerate me privately. They laughed at my reading in front of guests and called it teasing. They made decisions about the family business and the family foundation without me, and called it practicality. For years, I accepted that version of me, because resisting it required energy I didn't have. I did not accept it that night. That night was the Hartwell Foundation Gala, held at the Rainbow Room at Rockefeller Center. The skyline glittered beyond the windows like a cold promise. 300 donors filled the room with expensive laughter. Photographers moved through the crowd as if the lights belonged to them. The stage was dressed with orchids and a projection screen looping images of impact, the kind of charitable branding that makes giving feel like power. The invitation listed my name under my parents' names, right where a dutiful daughter's name belongs, when she is not meant to be her own person. I arrived alone. I wore a black dress I bought with money I saved from a job my father called temporary. It was simple, fitted, clean. The kind of dress that looks like confidence if you hold your posture still long enough. My heels were not designer. My makeup was not art. I did not look like my sister, who would arrive later in emerald silk, and a smile that had been practiced in mirrors. I walked to the seating cards because I wanted to find my table before the room swallowed me. The cards were arranged alphabetically, each one placed in a gold stand. I found the Hartwell cluster quickly. Gerald Hartwell, Priscilla Hartwell, Serena Hartwell, trustees, donor circle, chairs, then my card, Marin Hartwell, table 31. The number itself didn't mean much until I looked at the floor plan on the small printed map beside the cards. Table 31 was not in the main arc of the room. It was behind a decorative partition near the service corridor, close enough to the kitchen doors that the air would carry the scent of butter and heat, close enough that waitstaff could slip around the table without disrupting the important guests. The card did not include a title, not board member, not associate, not guest of honor, just my name, placed like an afterthought. I felt a familiar heat rise behind my eyes. I had spent my childhood at the edge of rooms. At family holidays, my father would raise his glass and announce Serena's next accomplishment, and then he would glance at me and add my name as if he had nearly forgotten it. When relatives chuckled, my mother would make a soft face that communicated both apology and agreement. Serena would smile politely, as if the joke had nothing to do with her. That night, the joke was printed in elegant type. I lifted the seating card from its stand and held it between my fingers. The cardstock was thick, expensive, and perfectly cut. It felt like a corporate document. It felt like a decision that had been made long before anyone printed the cards. I could have put it back. I could have pretended it didn't matter. I could have done what I had done for 20 years, take my assigned place and try not to make waves. I did not put it back. I carried the card with me into the room like a piece of evidence. The gala moved at the pace of money. People hugged and performed surprise. People introduced themselves as if their names were brands. My father stood near the center of the room with a donor couple from Miami, his hand on the man's shoulder, his laugh loud and controlled. He looked younger in crowds. He always did. My mother moved through knots of women in satin, her bracelets catching the light. Serena arrived with a small entourage and accepted attention as if it were oxygen. No one looked for me. That was normal. Table 31 was exactly where the map promised it would be. The table was dressed the same as the others, but the geography of power was unmistakable. The center tables had clean sightlines to the stage. Table 31 had a pillar and a partition. The stage was visible only if I leaned slightly to the left. I could hear the orchestra, but it sounded muffled here, as if music was another privilege being filtered. My table mates were distant relatives, and a couple who ran a boutique charity my mother supported occasionally when it made the social pages. They greeted me politely, and then returned their attention to each other. No one asked what I did. No one asked how I was. The conversation was about art auctions, real estate, summer plans, and which private school had the best college counselors. My glass of water sweated against the linen. I stared at the seating card in my lap, and a quiet thought formed in me, not as a dramatic declaration, but as a simple truth. If I stayed silent tonight, I would stay silent forever. That thought had a history. When I was 7, a specialist diagnosed my dyslexia and recommended accommodations. My mother nodded politely in the office and then ignored every suggestion the moment we stepped outside. My father used the diagnosis like a punchline. He treated reading as a measure of worth and speed, as proof of intelligence. If I stumbled, he turned it into entertainment. If I asked for help, he turned it into disappointment. My grandmother did the opposite. Vivian Hartwell built her money long before my father learned to wear tailored suits. She didn't inherit wealth, she made it. She ran a printing business with her own hands in the 70s and turned it into a manufacturing network that fed half the city's office supply chains. She donated quietly, without photographers, for decades. She funded scholarships. She paid hospital bills for employees. She gave money to shelters and demanded no plaques. She also read contracts like stories. When I was 13, she sat me at her kitchen table and showed me an old purchase agreement. She told me to stop fighting the words and start looking for structure. She taught me to find headings, terms, numbers, dates, and relationships. She taught me to create diagrams, arrows for obligations, boxes for parties, circles for risk. She treated my dyslexia like a difference in wiring, not a reason for shame. In my family, she was treated like an ancestor rather than a person, especially in her last years. My father spoke about her as if she were a brand he owned. Serena spoke about her as if she were a story for interviews. I was the one who visited her. Every Sunday, I took the train to her apartment on the Upper West Side and sat with her while she drank tea and watched the light shift across her bookshelves. She never called me slow. She never tried to fix my reading. She gave me audiobooks, paper with wide margins, pens that didn't smear. She gave me patience. She also watched my family, quietly, the way only a woman who built her own power knows how to watch. In her last year, she began asking sharper questions about the foundation. She asked why our annual gala costs had doubled. She asked why grant decisions were being routed through my father's office. She asked why a donor-advised fund had appeared in our financial materials, with a name suspiciously close to the Hartwell family office. My father dismissed her questions. My mother smoothed them over. Serena redirected them into polite conversation. My grandmother kept asking. Then she got sick. The illness was slow at first, like a shadow lengthening. Then it got fast. Hospital visits became weekly. Her handwriting grew shakier, but her mind stayed clear. If anything, the proximity of the end made her focus sharper. She began calling her attorney more often. She began organizing folders. She began leaving notes inside books. I noticed because she started leaving me tasks. Not emotional tasks, practical ones. Pick up a file from the safe, bring a binder, scan a document, confirm a date. Small errands that felt at the time like part of caring for her. I understand now that she was building a bridge for me to walk across later. She died 3 years before the gala. I watched my father take the microphone at her memorial and speak as if he had been her favorite. I watched Serena cry beautifully for photographs. I watched myself stand quietly, holding a grief that no one wanted from me because it wasn't decorative. And I watched my family move on as if my grandmother were an asset, not a person. At 8:30 that gala night, the lights softened and the orchestra faded. A spotlight found the stage. The room's conversations lowered, and attention turned forward the way attention always turns when it is being invited to witness power. My father walked onto the stage with a microphone and a smile. He spoke about the foundation's history, about the city, about legacy. He spoke as if he invented generosity. He spoke as if the Hartwell name was a natural resource and he was the one distributing it. Then he introduced Serena. He praised her in a way that made the audience lean in. Harvard, Yale, clerkship, strategy, vision. He described her future as if it were already written in ink. He announced that she would become the next chair of the foundation and the public face of our philanthropic work, effective immediately. He announced that she would oversee a new initiative that would merge the foundation's grants with a private donor-advised fund Serena had helped structure, a phrase that sounded charitable while concentrating authority. Applause filled the room. Serena stepped forward and accepted it like it belonged to her. Then my father shifted, and I felt the air change. He moved from celebration into announcement. He spoke about succession, about stability, about protecting the Hartwell mission. He announced that all voting authority over the foundation's endowment would rest with the chair and the executive committee, and that the committee would be selected by him during his lifetime. It was a public locking of doors. He did not mention me. He did not need to. My seating card had already done the work. The applause rose again, louder. I sat behind the partition and let it wash over me. That was the moment a stranger approached my table. He didn't look like a donor. His suit was gray, well-tailored but not flashy. His hair was silver, and his posture was careful. The posture of someone who has spent years in rooms where a single wrong word can cost millions. He did not carry a drink. He did not glance around as if he wanted attention. He moved directly toward me. He stopped beside table 31 and looked down with a professional calm that made my skin prickle. He checked the seating card in my lap, then my face, then nodded as if confirming a detail. He placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of me. No flourish. No apology. Just a quiet transfer. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, sealed with a wax stamp that carried a notary imprint. My name was handwritten on the front in a slanted script I recognized instantly. My grandmother's handwriting. The stranger's eyes stayed on mine long enough to deliver a message without words, and then he stepped back into the crowd and disappeared, as if the room had swallowed him. My hands shook as I picked up the envelope. I didn't open it at the table. I carried it out. I moved through the service corridor, past waiters and stacks of plates, until I found a quiet hallway where the carpet changed, and the lighting turned harsh. I leaned against the wall and broke the wax seal with my thumb. Inside were documents, neatly stacked. The first page was a letter on my grandmother's stationery, dated 2 years before she died. The second was a legal instrument titled Amendment to the Hartwell Foundation Governance Charter. The third was a notarized declaration, and clipped behind them was a simple sheet labeled Seating and Stewardship Protocol. The word swam for a second, the old dyslexia flare, the panic that used to come when letters refused to behave. I breathed through it and let my eyes find anchors, headings, paragraph breaks, numbers, structure. My grandmother wrote in the letter that she had noticed everything, not just my father's cruelty, but the quiet system he used to keep me small. She wrote that Serena's achievements were real, but that Serena's character had been shaped by applause and fear. She wrote that my parents confused Polish with worth. Then she wrote the sentence that made my throat close. She wrote that the seating card would be the signal. She wrote that if my family ever placed me at a table meant to hide me, I should stop hiding. She wrote that she had prepared a way for me to protect what she built. My knees weakened. I slid down the wall and sat on the carpet with the documents in my lap, as if I were holding something fragile. The governance amendment was clear. My grandmother had created a permanent seat on the Foundation's board called the Steward of Mission Integrity. That seat carried veto power over any changes to the endowment structure and any mergers with donor-advised funds. That seat also held the right to call an emergency governance meeting, bypassing the executive committee. And my grandmother had assigned that seat to me, not as a symbolic title, as a legal position with binding authority. There was a condition. The seat assignment activated only upon a public act of exclusion, defined in the document as either an explicit disinheritance or an official seating arrangement at a foundation event placing the named steward outside the donor circle. My seating card, Table 31. The documents included a 72-hour activation window. Within 72 hours of the triggering event, I had to submit a formal request for an emergency governance meeting. If I did not, the amendment would be archived and all authority would revert to the existing executive committee. The deadline was not punishment. It was a push. It was my grandmother's way of preventing me from talking myself out of action. My chest felt tight, but it wasn't only fear. It was something sharper. Permission. I gathered the pages, placed them back into the envelope, and stood. My hands still shook, but my posture changed. I walked back into the ballroom with the envelope held close to my body. The applause had faded into dinner service. People were eating and congratulating and pretending generosity was not a strategy. My father saw me moving through the room and frowned as if I had wandered into the wrong set. My mother's eyes flicked to me in a way, as if refusing to acknowledge my presence was still the safest habit. Serena watched me with a careful smile, the smile she used when she wanted to look unbothered. I left without speaking to any of them. I went home to my studio apartment in Queens and placed the envelope on my kitchen table. I did not sleep. I read every page 3 times, not because I doubted what it said, but because I needed to absorb that it was real. At dawn, I opened my laptop and searched for the name on the notary stamp. I found it quickly. Morrison, Hale, and Archer. I called the number listed for the managing partner. A receptionist answered, and I requested Jonathan Archer, using the name printed in the authentication block. Within an hour, a man returned my call. His voice was calm, practiced, and oddly familiar, as if I had heard it in my grandmother's apartment while she handled business calls from her armchair. I gave him my name. His pause was brief, but it carried recognition. He confirmed that he served as my grandmother's attorney for a decade. He confirmed that she left explicit instructions, including the condition about the seating card, including the 72-hour window. He confirmed that what I held was valid. He also confirmed something else. The envelope was only part 1. Part 2 was a sealed packet held in escrow. My grandmother's instruction required the attorney to release it only after an emergency meeting was formally requested. The packet contained exhibits, archive board minutes, a forensic summary of endowment transactions, and a memorandum documenting my father's repeated attempts to shift foundation assets into vehicles controlled by the Hartwell family office. My throat tightened with a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that my grandmother had built more than symbolism. Dread because the packet meant she expected a fight. The rest of that day moved like a controlled sprint. My grandmother's governance amendment required signatures from 2 existing board members to convene an emergency meeting. I needed 2 people willing to sign with me, 2 people willing to challenge my father without flinching. Old money does not like public conflict. It prefers quiet deals and private punishments. I needed people who had already been burned by my father's private punishments. Jonathan Archer provided names. Margaret Sloan, a longtime trustee who served alongside my grandmother for decades and had gradually been pushed aside by my father. Daniel Park, a real estate executive whose firm supported the foundation until my father attempted to force a contract that benefited the Hartwell family office more than the charity. and Elena Ramirez, a healthcare donor who resigned quietly after objecting to my father using grant announcements as leverage for business introductions. I called Margaret Sloan first. She answered quickly, and the tone of her voice told me she already knew why I was calling. That alone made my eyes sting. She told me my grandmother spoke about me often. She told me my grandmother never trusted Gerald with the foundation's heart. She told me the foundation was not meant to become a stage for succession announcements. She agreed to sign. Then she gave me advice that sounded harsh and felt like care. She warned me the meeting would be ugly. She warned me my father would attempt to humiliate me. She warned me Serena would present herself as the injured party. She warned me not to expect fairness from people who benefit from my silence. Then she reminded me that my grandmother built the foundation to protect people, not to protect Gerald's ego. I called Daniel Park next. He agreed to sign after he confirmed the documents with Jonathan Archer. He did not sound excited. He sounded relieved, as if someone had finally named a rot he had been forced to pretend was normal. By evening, the emergency meeting request had been submitted to the board secretary. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at 10. The 72-hour window would close that night at 8:30, the exact time my father announced Serena's new authority. The timing felt too precise to be coincidence. My grandmother planned it like a chess player. That night, Jonathan Archer emailed me the escrow packet. It contained 3 things that changed the air in my apartment. First, the founder's letter of intent, written by my grandmother years ago, emphasizing mission integrity and independence from family office influence. Second, board minutes from 2019, documenting my father's proposal to move the endowment into a new investment structure, managed by a company owned by the Hartwell family office, with fees that would have quietly siphoned millions over time. The proposal had been tabled because my grandmother raised concerns and 2 trustees supported her. Third, a forensic memo summarizing transactions my father approved later, after my grandmother's health declined. Transactions that were technically legal but ethically contaminated. Consulting fees to firms with social ties. Event budgets that ballooned. A donor-advised fund arrangement that blurred ownership lines. My father had not stolen money in a way that would make headlines. He had drained mission in a way that would take years to notice. My grandmother noticed. She documented it. She left it for me. The next day, my father discovered the meeting. He discovered it because board notices are formal, and formal notices leave paper trails. He could not stop the notice without revealing he intended to control the board. My phone lit with notifications, first from Serena, then from my mother, then from my father. I did not answer. I printed the governance amendment again. I printed my grandmother's letter. I printed the escrow exhibits. I organized them into a simple packet with tabs and headings. Because if there is one thing dyslexia taught me, it is that clarity is power. Saturday morning, I arrived at Hartwell House, our foundation's board office in Midtown, 20 minutes early. The building's lobby smelled like polished stone. The elevators moved smoothly, quietly. I wore a gray blazer borrowed from my friend because I did not yet own boardroom clothing. I carried a portfolio that held the documents like a spine. When the elevator opened onto the conference floor, my father waited at the end of the hallway. He stood with his arms folded as if the corridor belonged to him. Serena stood beside him, her posture perfect. My mother hovered behind them with a face tight enough to crack. For a moment, my childhood body tried to return. The body that wanted to shrink. The body that wanted to apologize for taking up space. Then I remembered the seating card in my drawer at home. I remembered my grandmother's handwriting. I remembered the word steward. I walked forward. I did not speed up. I did not slow down. I passed them without stopping. The boardroom doors were open. Trustees were already seated, and the atmosphere had the stale tension of a family argument disguised as governance. My father sat at the head of the table, as he always did. Serena positioned herself close, not a formal board member yet, but close enough to be seen as inevitable. Margaret Sloan sat near the middle, calm and sharp, Daniel Park sat across from her, fingers interlaced, watching quietly. Jonathan Archer sat in a corner seat with a briefcase and the calm face of someone who knows documents matter more than emotion. The board chair, Robert Leland, called the meeting to order. He stated the purpose: an emergency governance session requested by the steward of mission integrity under the amended charter. I rose and introduced myself, not as my father's daughter, not as Serena's sister, not as a staff assistant, as the steward. My father attempted to control the room through tone. He described me as unqualified, as emotionally unstable, as someone acting out of jealousy. He emphasized my dyslexia as evidence that I could not understand legal documents. He framed the meeting as a disruption. He used the same strategy he used my whole life: convert my difference into incompetence, then use incompetence as a reason to exclude me. No one laughed. Boardrooms do not laugh when counsel is present, and risk is measurable. I placed the governance amendment on the table and asked Jonathan Archer to authenticate it. Jonathan did. He verified dates, notarizations, and archival custody. He confirmed my grandmother filed the amendment with the Foundation's official governance records and that it carried her signature and witness attestations. Robert Leland read the relevant section aloud: the creation of the Steward of Mission Integrity seat, the veto powers, the emergency meeting provisions, the activation condition tied to public exclusion, and the 72-hour deadline. The room shifted. Words do that when they are backed by law. My father's face tightened. Serena's composure held, but the edges showed stress. I presented the seating protocol next and explained the trigger event without theatrics. The printed seating chart and my card were enough. Then I presented the escrow exhibits. I laid out the 2019 minutes. I laid out the founder's letter of intent. I laid out the forensic memo highlighting mission drift, fee extraction, and governance bypass attempts. I did not accuse. I did not dramatize. I offered a timeline. My dyslexia had taught me to build maps. I built a map of my father's behavior, and the board could see it. Then I made my motion. I did not move to remove my father outright. That would have been satisfying, but satisfaction is not the same as integrity. I moved for a vote of confidence in Gerald Hartwell's leadership as chair. If the board had confidence, he could remain, and I would work within the governance structure my grandmother created. If the board did not have confidence, he would step down, and an interim chair would be appointed. The motion forced the board to choose, not between father and daughter, not between scandal and silence, but between governance and ego. Robert Leland accepted the motion. Margaret Sloan seconded it. The board voted by paper ballot. I watched hands move, watched faces avoid each other, watched the room breathe shallowly. When Robert Leland counted the ballots, the numbers landed with the quiet finality of gravity: 6 votes against confidence, 3 votes for confidence, 1 abstention. The board did not have confidence. Gerald Hartwell was required to step down within 30 days, per the bylaws. The room did not erupt. Boardrooms rarely do. But something still broke. It was my father's certainty. He looked at me across the table, and for the first time in my life, fear sat in his eyes. Not fear of losing money, but fear of losing narrative control. He understood that my grandmother's documents did more than change governance. They revealed him. Serena looked at me too, and her expression held something I hadn't expected. Not only anger, also confusion. For Serena, the world had always rewarded compliance. The idea that power could shift based on mission integrity rather than polish made no sense to her. My mother's face crumpled slightly. She looked older, not because of age, but because her illusion of family unity had finally been exposed as theater. My father left the boardroom without speaking. A few minutes later, in the corridor outside the meeting room, he tried to regain control in the way he always had, by pressing close and making the air feel smaller. His hands moved as if he wanted to grab my arm, then stopped. He demanded explanations, demanded loyalty, demanded that I remember my place. The demand did not land the way he expected. It sounded like a man arguing with the direction of the tide. I stayed steady. I did not argue. I did not plead. I allowed the governance documents to do the speaking. The hardest part was not resisting him. The hardest part was resisting the old instinct to make him comfortable. I stayed seated until the meeting formally adjourned. I listened to Robert Leland outline next steps: interim leadership, governance review, audit committee, a pause on any endowment restructuring pending an independent assessment. I agreed to serve as steward. I agreed to sit on compliance and grant oversight committees. I agreed to be present. I did not celebrate. I felt grief. Grief has a habit of showing up when a door finally closes. The door I grieved wasn't my father's position. It was the door of hope that he would one day choose me without being forced. That hope ended in a boardroom. The following weeks were quieter than I expected and heavier than I imagined. My father attempted a soft campaign: private calls to trustees, messages to donors, hints that I was unstable and being manipulated by old allies. He avoided direct accusations because direct accusations invite discovery. He preferred implication because implication is harder to pin down. Jonathan Archer advised restraint. Margaret Sloan advised patience. Daniel Park advised transparency. I chose transparency. I asked the board to authorize an independent audit. Not an audit designed to catch theft, but an audit designed to measure mission alignment and governance compliance. The auditors produced a report that did not accuse my father of crimes. It did something worse in his world. It described his leadership as high risk to the foundation's mission and reputation. Donors noticed that phrase. By the time my father resigned, donors were already requesting meetings with the interim chair and the stewardship committee instead of the Hartwell family office. My father built his power on access. Access shifted. Staff members noticed too, in smaller ways. A program director who had spent years pushing for more direct services stopped me in the hallway and thanked me with wet eyes. A grants administrator emailed me spreadsheets that made their frustration visible. Funds redirected to events. Staff time consumed by photo ops. Partner organizations asked to hold off on urgent requests until after gala season. The foundation was full of people doing real work under a layer of performance. My father loved the performance. The staff loved the work. My grandmother loved the work. I decided to love the work too. Serena tried to steady the family narrative. She circulated invitations, posted photos, arranged lunches with the right people. She performed stability the way she had been taught to perform. It didn't work. The foundation's work began to change, slowly, not with dramatic press releases, but with decisions that didn't require a spotlight. Event spending decreased. Direct grants increased. Partnerships were selected for outcomes, not for headlines. A literacy initiative launched in public schools, not with a gala announcement, but with supplies delivered quietly, and teachers hired with grant money that actually stayed in classrooms. The first time I attended a school visit, I felt something in my chest loosen. The work was not abstract there. It was real. It didn't need orchids. Serena requested a private meeting later, away from trustees and away from our parents. We met in a cafe in Midtown. Her posture was still perfect, but her eyes looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from holding up a story for too long. She described pressure and expectation and being trained to perform. She described fear of becoming the target if she defended me. She described how easy it had been to accept praise and let silence do the rest. I listened without interrupting. I did not offer instant forgiveness because forgiveness cannot be commanded by the person who benefits from it. I offered clarity instead. I explained that I was not trying to steal her future. I was trying to stop mine from being erased. I explained that my grandmother did not choose me because Serena was a villain. My grandmother chose me because someone had to hold the mission when the family treated it like a stage. Serena listened in a way she never had before. Our relationship did not become a fairy tale. It did not suddenly turn into the sisterhood we never had. But hostility softened into something more realistic: cautious honesty. My mother attempted an apology later. It arrived in fragments, not as a perfect speech, but as a trembling admission that she had been afraid of my father, and afraid of social shame, and afraid of admitting she failed one of her children. I accepted her attempt without granting absolution. At my age, I don't trade in clean emotional resolutions. I trade in steady ones. My father contested the governance amendment as expected. He hired attorneys. He requested hearings. He tried to frame my grandmother as diminished and manipulated. The legal process did what legal processes do. It reduced emotion to documentation. Documentation favored my grandmother. She had been meticulous. She placed the amendment in multiple custodial archives. She included medical assessments attesting to capacity. She anticipated my father's arguments and designed her documents to survive them. My father lost. He resigned on schedule. He did not call me to acknowledge it. His silence was not surprising. It was his last form of control. When the resignation became public inside the foundation, the staff email was careful and corporate, but private messages came through like cracks of sunlight. Some thanked me. Some simply wrote that they could breathe again. One message from an older program manager described my grandmother as the only person who ever asked what the staff needed, instead of what the donors wanted. Reading that felt like holding my grandmother's hand again. Months later, the Foundation's annual report went public. Headlines were quiet, not dramatic, not tabloid. But inside the report were numbers that mattered: increased direct grants, reduced administrative spending on events, a new initiative focused on literacy resources, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a practical promise to children whose brains work differently. That initiative became my work. I did not become chair. I did not want to become what my father was. I remained the steward. I became a builder in the way my grandmother had been a builder, not of stages, but of structures that hold people. Not long after the annual report, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time since the gala. I brought no flowers, only the small box that held her letter and my seating card. I sat on the cold stone bench and let the city noise fade into a hum. I did not ask for forgiveness or guidance. I offered an update, silently, the way people do when they still feel someone listening. The hardest part to admit was that I missed her more after I won than I missed her while I was losing. While I was losing, grief felt like another weight. After I won, grief felt like an empty space where she should have been to see it. Nearly a year after the gala, I opened a drawer and found the seating card again. Table 31. My name in elegant type. I held it between my fingers and felt a strange tenderness, not toward my family's cruelty, toward my own younger self, the version of me who would have swallowed that humiliation and called it peace. I placed the card back in the box with my grandmother's letter, not as a trophy, as a reminder. Some decisions begin with a document. Some begin with a card on a console in a crowded room. That night, a seating card tried to hide me. Instead, it became the signal my grandmother designed, the moment the Hartwell Foundation stopped being a family stage and returned to being what it was meant to be: a mission, a responsibility, a promise kept.